Mr. Akaka. Without objection, under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 2354, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 157, H.R. 2354, an act making appropriations for energy and water development and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I've been authorized by the Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee to withdraw the committee report as substitute amendment.
The amendment is withdrawn.
Thanks, Mr. President. I have a substitute amendment, which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes an amendment numbered 956. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the following. Division A, Energy and Water Development and related agencies. The following sums are appropriated.
Ask further reading of the amendment be waived, Mr. President.
Without objection. The senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise to raise concerns about this amendment that would constitute a significant change to U.S. foreign and banking policies that should be carefully considered by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Banking Committee. These provisions have far-reaching foreign policy implications which make their inclusion in this bill unsupportable. This amendment would allow Cuba, the Banco Nacional de Cuba, to become the only country on the State Department's state sponsors of terrorism list to have direct access to U.S.-based financial institutions. It would allow a country that does not subscribe to basic principles of anti-money laundering and counterterrorism to make direct transfers to U.S. financial institutions. And all of this at the same time making concessions to the regime when a United States citizen, Alan Gross, remains a hostage in Cuban prisons. His crime working with U.S. democracy programs to enhance the ability of the island's small Jewish community to communicate with the world. And it comes at a time when there's been a crackdown on peaceful democracy activists like Las Damas de Blanco, the ladies in white, who take to walking in the streets every Sunday to protest the political imprisonment of their husbands, brothers, and sons. The message we should be sending to such regimes, whether in Cuba or Syria, North Korea or Iran, is that they are pariahs, that their blood money has no place in our economy, and that the currency of freedom prevails over the currency of repression. Therefore, Mr. President, along with my colleagues, Senator Nelson of Florida, Senator Rubio, I raise a Rule 16 point of order against the pending substitute amendment.
Would the, Mr. President, would the senator yield?
The point of order is well taken and the amendment falls.
Mr. President,
the majority leader.
Without my losing the floor, I yield 3 minutes to the senator from Florida, Mr. Nelson.
Senator from Florida.
And I thank the majority leader, and I won't take the 3 minutes just to say that my objection is the same as the senator from New Jersey and my colleague from Florida, Senator Rubio. The fact is that the provision in the bill would allow direct payments between U.S. sellers and Cuban buyers of agricultural goods, and under the existing restrictions, U.S. exports to Cuba have fallen dramatically in the last few years, largely due to the regime's shortage of hard currency. In other words, the sanctions are working, and now is not the time to relax the U.S. economic sanctions, particularly while we see in this planet Earth of 2011 a repressive regime like is the one there in Cuba and the one that continues to hold Alan Gross.
Majority Leader.
Without my losing the floor, I would yield 3 minutes to the senator from Florida, Senator Rubio.
Senator from Florida.
I want to thank the Majority Leader for that, and I'll be brief. I think my colleagues have touched upon it and the public policy behind this. And I just lost in all the things that are happening around the world. They're very important. I think we need to remind ourselves that just a few miles off the coast of the United States, the most repressive government in the Western Hemisphere conducts its business and is able to fund it through a lot of this interaction going on as we speak between commercial interests in the United States and in Cuba. And I don't mean in any way, by the way, I know these are folks that are in business and are not doing it with bad intentions, but the practical implications of this agreed interaction with the Castro regime is hard currency. It's money that they take and use to pay for this repressive arm at a time when we see more repression this year than we have in recent years as the Castro government continues to fear that it's losing its grip on power and on influence over its own society. So I would just say that I'm supportive of what Senator Menendez is trying to do here, and I urge our colleagues to keep a watchful eye on what happens in Cuba. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I am sorry I've rushed this senator from New Jersey and the two senators from Florida. I would ask consent that the full statement of my friend from New Jersey be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let me take a moment to explain what's happened. I offered a substitute amendment that included the versions of the Energy and Water Financial Service and State of Foreign Ops appropriation bills that the Senate Appropriations Committee, on a bipartisan basis, reported. Senator Menendez raised a point of order against substitute amendment. Senator Menendez had a right to do that. As Senator Menendez has explained, he objects to provisions in the committee-reported financial service bill that relate to Cuba, and that's been underscored by my friend Senator Bill Nelson from Florida and my friend Marco Rubio from Florida. The amendment that I just offered is exactly the same as my last substitute amendment and the last minibus, except that it does not include the Cuba-related provisions to which Senator Menendez objected. It deletes Section 620 and 624 of the Financial Services Bill reported to the Senate. I hope that this amendment can give us the basis to move forward on this bill. So, Mr. President, I have a substitute amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes an amendment numbered 957.
I ask for the reading of the amendment be waived.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that amendment number 957, which consists of the text of the withdrawn committee report amendment as Division A, the text of S 1573, with the exception of sections 620 and 624, to which I've just referred. Counter number 171 as Division B and the text of S 1601, counter number 179 as Division C, provided further that H.R. 2434 is reported by the House Appropriations Committee and Division C of Amendment number 957 be deemed House-passed text in H.R. 2354 for purpose of Rule 16. Finding that Amendment number 957, for the purposes of paragraph 1 of Rule 16, be considered a committee amendment.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. Mr. President, thank you. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee and a member of the ranking minority member of the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee. The amendment that the Majority Leader offered that excluded the provisions related to Cuba was an amendment that was adopted by that full Appropriations Committee in a very bipartisan way. In fact, the vote was 2/3 to 1/3, 20 votes in favor, 10 votes against. The provisions that have been struck by the procedure that has occurred today really are the implementation, the final implementation of legislation that was passed by this Congress in 2001, in which we provided for the first time the sale for cash up front of agriculture commodities, food and medicine. It's always been my view that when we fail to sell agricultural commodities to Cuba, we only harm ourselves. The amendment that has, again, through this process, been eliminated from consideration today would implement the ability for money to be transferred to the United States by a Cuban bank for purposes of paying for that sale up front. And, Mr. President, we have worked closely with the administration, with the Treasury Department, to make certain that nothing contained or nothing that would be contained in this provision would be objectionable to the security or the financial safety and soundness of our country. And so, Mr. President, the process that has occurred, while there could have been many Rule 16 points of order made today, one was made that defeats the will of the majority of our committee, and I do object.
President.
Objection is heard. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I have a full statement that I want to give as to why I'm going to move through the next process. I understand my friend from Louisiana is here. I'll be happy at the appropriate time to yield to him to make a statement. But right now I have to ask for the yeas and nays on the substitute.
Is there a sufficient second?
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Yeah. Mr. President, without my right to lose the floor, I yield to my friend from Louisiana for 3 minutes.
I thank Senator from Louisiana.
I thank the Majority Leader, and I also rise to object to the motion in question for completely different reasons than my colleague from Kansas. I rise to object, and several join me in this view, because I believe these additional appropriation bills, which are trying to be brought to the floor, simply spend too much money. Mr. President, our greatest challenge as a nation right now is our economy, and a big part of that challenge is the fact that we have completely unsustainable federal spending and deficit and debt. And yet, Mr. President, in the midst of all that, these appropriation bills spend more money than we're spending already, not less. Now, Mr. President, every American with common sense knows that when you're in a deep, deep hole, step one is to stop digging. We, as a country, are in a deep, deep fiscal hole, but these bills have us continuing to dig further. These bills, the three bills that the Majority Leader wants to bring to the floor together, spend $6 billion more than we're spending now. We're spending more and not less, even though we're $15 trillion in debt. Mr. President, that's simply continuing to dig when we're in a deep, deep fiscal hole. Also, Mr. President, when you look at some of the details of this spending, it makes it even more offensive to millions upon millions of Americans. Allowing funds for overseas groups that perform abortion, allowing taxpayer-funded abortion in the District of Columbia, allowing elective abortions in the Federal Employee Health Benefit Program, allowing funding of abortion by the Peace Corps, and $40 million for the UN Population Fund, deeply involved in China's pro-abortion population control program. So, Mr. President, I think it's a deadly combination in more ways than one. We're continuing to dig when we're already in a deep hole, and then when you look at the details of the spending, so many parts of that in and of themselves are deeply offensive to tens of millions of Americans. And based on that, Mr. President, and joined by many conservative colleagues of the Senate, I also object. And I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, the bills that we brought before the Senate, Energy and Water, Financial Services, Foreign Operations, are all within the agreement that we made in July. Deficit reduction package, debt ceiling package that we passed. Passed the Senate, passed the House, signed by the President. So my friend from Louisiana is trying to renegotiate something that was passed after 3 months' work that we did on it. I regret that there's been an objection to my request. But what I just saw was the same understanding we had in the last appropriation measure, which worked pretty well. We passed those three bills. They're going to be, the conference should be completed momentarily. We will have to vote on that this coming week. Included in that is the CR to fund the government until sometime in the middle of December. But there's been an objection to proceeding along those same lines. Everything that was raised by my friend from Louisiana, that's what the amendment process is all about. But we wanted it to be like we have done in the past, that these appropriation matters, the amendments would have to be germane. But he was unwilling to live by that standard and offer amendments that had nothing to do with the underlying bill. That's what the American people can't stand. The Senate has rules that govern appropriation measures. These Senate rules are necessary because appropriation matters are must-pass bills. And we need some rules to prevent them from becoming Christmas trees. Senate rules thus prevent non-germane amendments. And the Senate rules prevent legislating on appropriation bills. So those two things have the protection only on appropriation bills. If we didn't have these rules, these appropriation measures would become unmanageable. So what I sought with my unanimous consent request was to create an environment where the regular rules of the Senate for appropriation measures could be in effect. Regrettably, we didn't get that agreement. If we did those bills individually, Mr. President, that's automatic. Without such an agreement, though, we have another thing about which we have to worry. Funding for the government runs out at the end of this week. So before we leave this week, the Senate needs to pass the continuing resolution contained in the conference report on the agriculture appropriation bill, which also included other appropriation matters. We can't allow the Senate to get tied up in knots in a way that would prevent us from getting that work done. As I said this morning, I've made a commitment to Senators Levin and McCain that we're going to move to the authorization bill as soon as we finish this appropriation package. I intend to do that. So we'll engage in further discussions about how we can move forward with these important measures. In the meantime, we need to take steps to at least temporarily hold matters where they are. So there, Mr. President, as I indicated, I had pending the yeas and nays on the substitute.
There's sufficient second. There is a sufficient second.
I have a first.
Yeas and nays are ordered.
Thank you. I have a first degree amendment, which is perfecting in nature at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes amendment number 958 to amendment number 957.
I ask for the yeas and nays on that amendment.
Is there a sufficient second? Appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have a second degree amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes amendment number 959 to amendment number 958.
I have an amendment at the desk to the language proposed to be stricken.
The clerk will report the amendment.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes amendment number 960 to the language proposed to be stricken by amendment number 957.
I ask for the yeas and nays on that amendment.
Is there a sufficient second? Appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have a second degree amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the second degree amendment.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes amendment number 961 to amendment number 960.
I have a motion to recommit the bill with instructions. That is also at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, moves to recommit the bill H.R. 2354 to the Committee on Appropriations with instructions to report back forthwith with amendment number 962.
I ask for the yeas and nays on that motion.
Is there a sufficient second? Appears to be a sufficient second. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have an amendment to the instruction at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes amendment number 963 to the instructions of 962 of the motion to recommit H.R. 2354.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have a second degree amendment at the desk.
Will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes amendment number 964 to amendment number 963.
Mr. President, I indicated during the last week that I did not want to have to fill the tree on this. It's unfortunate that an objection was raised. We were able to move forward, as I indicated, in the last so-called minibus with 3 appropriation bills made into one. So we're now in a situation where we have no way to move forward unless we have an agreement on the underlying bill, which is Energy and Water bill. Now, I have some knowledge of that bill. I was on the Appropriations Committee from the day I got to the Senate, and I've worked on that subcommittee for many, many years, several decades. And I was chairman of that subcommittee quite a few times. I worked with Senator Domenici. When we go back and forth as to who was the chair, we worked extremely well together. We were able to get the bill done quickly and satisfy the needs of members of this body. If I can have the efforts of my friends, Senator Feinstein, Senator Alexander, to move forward on this in a way that we can have some view of how we can end this legislation fairly quickly with the ability to have amendments, I would have no problem. Because, as I've indicated, we have a lot of things to do before we leave here. We cannot come back here in December with a lot of unfinished business. I talked in my caucus today about the Defense Authorization Bill. I think we have to finish that bill before we leave here for Thanksgiving. And so we've got the minibus conference report. We have this now Energy and Water Appropriation Bill, which I believe in is so important. And we have, of course, the Defense Authorization Bill. So I say to everyone here, if we can work something out, good. I hope we can.
Mr. President. Senator from Tennessee. I wonder if I might respond through the chair to the majority leader. I've been consulting with the chairman of our committee, and on the Republican side, we understand what the majority leader is saying. What I hear him saying, he's got some important work that we have to do this week. He wants to move to the Defense Authorization Bill before the end of the week. We have a conference report that includes a continuing resolution. He wants that acted on before the end of the week. What our hope is that we can deal with the Energy and Water Bill today and tomorrow. And I'm beginning to ask our Republican senators, and Senator Feinstein can speak for herself, but she's doing the same with Democratic members, and asking them to get their proposed amendments to the floor this afternoon, if at all possible, so we can give the majority leader some idea of how many amendments there might be so he can evaluate how to proceed. So we're going to, we appreciate the opportunity to do that. We believe that doing the appropriations bill is the basic work of the Senate. This is important both from a defense and a non-defense point of view. It had broad support in our committee, and so far I've not found anyone on our side who isn't agreeable to moving quickly on it. Now, I'll know more at the end of the afternoon, and I'll report to the majority leader about the Republican side, and I ask my colleagues who are listening to please bring their amendments to the floor this afternoon as soon as possible.
I have absolute confidence in the chairman of the subcommittee and the ranking member. They're two of our finest, and they have a reputation here of working to get things done on a bipartisan basis, and that's certainly necessary in this most important piece of legislation.
Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Mr. President, if I understand this correctly, it is as Senator Alexander has stated, and that the effort is to, under a germane rule, have the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill brought to the floor. If that is achieved, then all members, including Democratic members, should get their amendments to the floor as soon as possible. We know what this week is like. We know the Defense Authorization Bill has to come to the floor. We know there are other items that have to come to the floor this week. And so, therefore, I hope this effort is successful and that we are able to begin to work on our bill. Senator Alexander.
I thank the chairman. Mr. President, that's exactly right. Just so senators know, Senator Reid has filled the tree. But what we hope to persuade him is that we know the number of amendments that we have and that he doesn't need to do that. He's perfectly able to withdraw that. And I know that several of our Republican colleagues are discussing this afternoon how many amendments they want to offer, and it's my hope that we'll be able to soon be able to start voting on those amendments, vote on them tomorrow, finish the bill sometime tomorrow.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Consent to leave the bill and to speak briefly on morning business.
The Senate is still in a quorum call.
I ask the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to remember the life and to honor the legacy of a remarkable woman, an advocate for breast cancer research and awareness, a philanthropist, a savvy businesswoman, an accomplished photographer and author, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a dear friend, Evelyn Lauder. Evelyn lost her courageous battle with ovarian cancer on Saturday. She's survived by her husband of 52 years, Leonard Lauder, her sons, William and Gary, and 5 grandchildren. In many ways, her life parallels the familiar immigrant story of 20th century America. It's the story of a woman who escaped Nazi Europe, voyaged to the United States of America, and proceeded to enrich this country in countless ways. Evelyn Hauser was born on August 12, 1936, in Vienna. She was the only child of Ernest and Mimi Hauser. When Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, the family fled to Belgium with just a few sentimental belongings. Later, the family relocated to England during the Blitz. In England, Evelyn's mother was sent to an internment camp on the Isle of Man. Evelyn was sent to live in a nursery. Eventually, the family was reunited. And in 1940, they set sail for New York City. Evelyn often told a story about arriving in New York Harbor at the dawn of the Second World War. She said, and I quote, "My mother woke me up really early in the morning to see the Statue of Liberty. That's a sight I'll remember all my life," end quote. She fell in love with New York that morning and would give back to her adopted city for the next 7 decades. She was a proud product of the New York City public school system. As a freshman at Hunter College, she met her future husband on a blind date. Leonard Lauder was the son of Estee and Joseph Lauder, the owners of what then was just a small family cosmetics business. Evelyn was a public school teacher for several years, and in 1959, she formally joined Estee Lauder, pitching in wherever she was needed. As the company grew to become an international conglomerate, so too did Evelyn's role and influence. She held many different positions at the company over the years. One of the earliest projects she tackled was to create the company's training programs. She enhanced the Estee Lauder product lineup by adding new colors and products that appealed to a range of complexions and skin types. She had great instincts about new trends, about the needs of a consumer, about the development of skincare and cosmetics. In fact, it was Evelyn who helped launch the name, the Clinique brand. In the last 25 years, she focused on fragrance, a lifelong passion she shared with her famous mother-in-law that stemmed from her love of flowers and gardening. In 1999 and in 2007, she was recognized as one of New York's 100 most influential women in business by Crain's New York Business. Evelyn was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1989 and soon became a tireless advocate for women's health. True to form, she was reluctant to publicly discuss her own condition. "My situation doesn't really matter," she told a reporter in 1995. Instead, she chose to channel her energy and attention into helping raise money and educate women with less access and information about the disease. In 1989, as a member of the Board of Overseers at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, she initiated a fundraising drive that raised more than $18 million to establish the Evelyn H. Lauder Breast Center, the country's first ever breast and diagnostic center. The center opened in 1992 and is a model for similar facilities around the world. In 1992, Evelyn developed the iconic pink ribbon, which we all know today as the worldwide symbol of breast health. She spearheaded the distribution of millions of pink ribbons and breast self-exam instruction cards at Estee Lauder cosmetic counters all across the country. Her efforts elevated breast cancer awareness in the public consciousness, and almost 2 decades later, more than 115 million pink ribbons and millions of educational brochures and bookmarks have been handed out around the world. In 1993, she turned her attention to supporting the world's leading medical and scientific researchers and established the Breast Cancer Research Foundation to address the crucial lack of breast cancer research funding. Under her leadership, the foundation has grown to become the largest national organization dedicated exclusively to funding research relating to the causes, treatment, and prevention of breast cancer. To date, this foundation has raised $350 million and supports 186 researchers around the United States, Canada, Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, Australia, and China. In 2000, Evelyn Lauder launched the annual Global Landmark Illuminations Initiative. Now, we have all enjoyed seeing historic landmarks illuminated in pink lights during the month of October. Each year, more than 200 prominent landmarks around the world participate. Evelyn has bathed the Empire State Building, Niagara Falls, the Tower of London, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the Tokyo Tower in pink lights. There was another side to Evelyn. She was an accomplished photographer with a keen eye and ability to capture extraordinary images. I have 2 of her photographs and treasure them. Her photography included rainbows rising from the Pacific Ocean, snow scenes in Colorado, patterns created by light reflecting on water, landscapes in Chile, Tuscany, and the south of France, among others. Evelyn's work was featured in exhibitions at art galleries in London, Paris, Jerusalem, Barcelona, and Beijing, and well-received exhibitions in New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, and my hometown of San Francisco. She also published 2 books of photographs and had her work featured in many publications, including American Photo, House and Garden, the Oprah magazine, and Town and Country. Evelyn was modest and self-effacing, but she donated all proceeds from her photographic exhibitions and royalties from her books to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. Mr. President, Evelyn Lauder was one of a kind. She was a beautiful woman. I knew her. I remember Evelyn, her husband, my husband, and I sitting around a small table in a small Italian restaurant in New York City. And I looked across that table at this beautiful woman and all that she has done in her lifetime. It is truly amazing. Her life may have begun under challenging circumstances, but she became one of the country's most generous philanthropists and accomplished businesswoman. She was fun, she was smart, she was talented. She was a devoted wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. She was a remarkable American woman, and she will be missed. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Tennessee is recognized. I ask that the quorum call be vitiated. Without objection. And I ask consent to speak as a morning business. Without objection. Mr. President, last week, the senator from Wyoming, Senator Enzi, and the senator from Illinois, the Democratic whip, introduced a piece of legislation which is called the Marketplace Fairness Act. And in doing so, I think they've solved a problem that has persisted in almost every state in the Union, and that Congress has had a difficult time dealing with for the last 14 or 15 years. And that is the problem of what do we do about state sales taxes, which everybody owes every time they make a purchase. I mean, if you buy a television set at the local appliance store, you owe New Mexico sales tax or Tennessee sales tax. And if you buy it from Amazon and you live in New Mexico or Tennessee, you owe the sales tax. The difference has been that the local retailer is required to collect it, and does, and sends it to the state, but the online vendor, let's say Amazon, is not required to collect it, and so it doesn't. And so most individuals, like if I bought a television set from Amazon earlier this year, well, I would need to, at the end of the year, file a form with our state government and say, I bought it, they didn't collect the sales tax, so I owe the sales tax. But the truth is, most Americans don't do that. And that's a $23 billion a year tax avoidance, a great big tax loophole. And one may ask, well, why has that loophole not been closed? We hear a lot of talk about loopholes around here. And we know states would like to have dollars right now, either to lower taxes or pay for services. And most of us think that we shouldn't prefer one business over another business or one taxpayer over another taxpayer. And the problem is that the Supreme Court 20 years ago said that the technology didn't exist 20 years ago to make it easy for online vendors to collect the sales tax in the same way the local shoe store or local vendor collects it, and so it would be an undue burden on interstate commerce. So for 20 years, there's been this great big loophole. Now, here's the loophole in practical terms. I called the owner of the Nashville Boot Company last week after we introduced the bill, Frank Harwell, and at the beginning, he sold everything. He sold cowboy boots online. I think it's the Nashville Cowboy Boot Company. But he sold boots online. And he said he sold as much as $400,000 a year of cowboy boots online. That was his major business. But then he said, he was about the only one doing that. And I assume if you want a cowboy boot, Nashville would sound like a good place to buy them, so he was doing all right. Now he said there are about 200 people selling boots online, so he does most of his boot selling out of his store. He has a store there in Belmead Plaza, right next to where I take my granddaughter to breakfast on Saturday mornings. But this is what he says happens to him. He says people come into the Nashville Cowboy Boot Store and they try on the cowboy boots and then they go home and buy it online because they don't have to pay the sales tax. Now they owe the sales tax, but as I said, the online sellers is not required to collect it, and many taxpayers just fail to pay it, even though they owe it. Now, we're not talking about Internet tax here. The Senate had a great big debate on the Internet access tax a few years ago. I was right in the middle of that. And by the time we got through with it, we had a compromise, and we put a moratorium on Internet access tax. So there's no such thing right now as an Internet tax. We're not talking about an Internet tax. We're not talking about a new tax. We're talking about the plain old state sales tax that everybody except in 5 states, one of them being New Hampshire, which doesn't have a sales tax, in 45 states that is owed. Now, I've been very pleased with the reception that I've heard to the bill by Senator Enzi and Senator Durbin. It has 5 Republican co-sponsors. I'm one of them. It has 5 Democratic co-sponsors. We hope there will be more. Many of the people who saw problems with earlier attempts to fix the bill believe this legislation solves the problem. Some of the early bills were large. This bill is 10 pages. It's very simple. If the problem was it was too complicated for Amazon to collect the online tax, they fixed that because they've said, well, Tennessee, if it wants to require Amazon to do the same thing the local boot company does, it has to provide Amazon with software that will make it simple for Amazon to collect the tax. When I want to know the weather in my hometown in outside Maryville, Tennessee, I simply put in weather and the zip code 37886, back comes the information. That's all an online vendor will have to do now. It'll just put in Lamar Alexander, cowboy boots, whatever they cost, the zip code, and the computer software will figure out the local sales tax and report it to the vendor, and the vendor, once a quarter, will send the money electronically to whatever state. So the old problems don't exist. You don't have to sort out many different taxing districts. There has to be one rate for each state, up to the state to figure it out, up to the state to figure out the software. There can only be one state audit. It's as easy as looking up the weather on Google or whatever other search engine you use. That'll be how easy it is. And the only reason why the Supreme Court said the states couldn't require online vendors to do the same thing that local vendors do was because of the burden on interstate commerce. Now, I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal today, which I thought was very well balanced. It takes a whole page. Should states require online retailers to collect sales tax? Yes, it's fair. No, protect small firms. Now, I'm not going to put this in the record, but I do want to take issue with one argument among those who said no, protect small firms. Two arguments, really. One, the NC Durbin legislation has a $500,000 exemption. So my friend in Nashville, who was the only, and I guess for a while, the leading seller of cowboy boots online, never made more than $400,000 in revenues. He said, I could tell that. So if he doesn't have more than $500,000 in revenue, he's not even affected by this legislation that gives states the option to decide what to do. Second, this says that the legislation would overturn the Supreme Court ruling of 20 years ago. That's not accurate. It doesn't overturn anything. What the Supreme Court said 20 years ago was that at the state of technology that existed, with so many different taxing jurisdictions, it was an undue burden on interstate commerce for states to require online sellers to collect the tax that's owed. But this is what the court said, quote, "This aspect of our decision is made easier by the fact that the underlying issue is not only one that Congress may be better qualified to resolve, but also one that Congress has the ultimate power to resolve. No matter how we evaluate the burdens that use taxes impose on interstate commerce, Congress remains free to disagree with our conclusions." And then it said, accordingly, Congress is now free to decide whether, when, and to what extent the states may burden interstate mail order concerns with a duty to collect use taxes. So this isn't overturning anything. It's simply saying, it's simply responding to the invitation by the Supreme Court 20 years ago that said, as we look at it, this is too big a burden. That was back when there were thousands of taxing districts and no easy way to collect the money. But it did say that Congress had the right to decide what represents a burden. And what this bill says is there are two ways that states may do this. There's the Streamlining Act that about half the states have joined together and said, we'll create a single way to allow online vendors to operate. Or the state of Kentucky may say, we don't like what they're doing, we'll create our own way. And as long as it's a single way, a single rate, a single audit, and the state provides the software, the vendor can do it. That is why Amazon decided last week that it supported the NC Durbin bill. It's been probably the leading opponent of the bill. And on the Republican or conservative side, there have been a lot of people who said, this is about taxes. Well, it's about taxes, but it's about taxes in a way that conservatives like to talk about. We like to say we don't like it when the government policy prefers some taxpayers over others, some businesses over others. We also, on this side of the aisle, really believe in states' rights. And this bill doesn't decide anything. It simply empowers states to make their own decisions about taxes. And in our state, for example, we have one of the lowest tax burdens, but we have the highest state sales tax. If we're able to collect $300, $400, $500 million more dollars in Tennessee from this tax that's now avoided because of the loophole, I'm sure there'll be proposals to reduce the sales tax rate or to reduce some other tax. And certainly the money will help to avoid the arrival of a state income tax, which is about the most hated word in our tax vocabulary in Tennessee. So I'd like to introduce into the congressional record some of the responses that have come just since last week. The Memphis Commercial Appeal editorial, which urged that Congress close this long-standing loophole in the current tax law. It's the right thing to do. And Greg Johnson, a conservative columnist in the Knoxville News-Sentinel, said online sales tax bill would level the playing field. His article refers to the fact that 10 years ago, William F. Buckley, Jr., whom he calls the father of modern conservatism, opined to the National Review about this problem and that it needed a result. The same sort of argument was made by Al Cardenas, who's head of the American Conservative Union, who wrote an article last week and said this needs to be fixed and supports a bill like the one we introduced. And an editorial from the Seattle Times, and an editorial from the Paris, Tennessee Post-Intelligencer, an editorial from the Denver Post, and one from Bellevue in Illinois. All of these make the same points. This is a states' rights argument. It is about allowing states to close a loophole, a tax loophole. It is about stopping the subsidization of some taxpayers, of other taxpayers, stopping the subsidization of some business over others. About the only ones left who are complaining are the taxpayers and the businesses who enjoy being subsidized by other taxpayers and other businesses, and that, in our opinion, isn't the correct tax policy. I'm very pleased with the work of Senator Enzi, Senator Durbin, and I'll conclude where I started. I think they have solved the problem. And as more senators look at the fairness of the Marketplace Fairness Act and look at the options it gives each state, I hope we have more co-sponsors. And if I were running an online retailer in this country, I would begin to make my plans to collect the sales taxes that are already owed and return them to the states from which they're collected, because it's the law, and states will have the right under this to do it, and more online vendors are making voluntary agreements with state to collect these taxes that are already owed. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.